Olá, meu nome é Stevens Rehen e vou compartilhar com vocês um vídeo que eu gravei na Califórnia no mês passado com Michael Eisen. Michael é um pesquisador da Universidade de Berkeley que resolveu se candidatar ao Senado americano. Nesse vídeo ele conta um pouquinho das motivações e as justificativas para essa candidatura. Eu acho que é um momento importante e oportuno do Brasil para a gente discutir um cientista se candidatando e entrando na política dos Estados Unidos. Tá? Espero que vocês curtam esse vídeo e agradeço muito aos Dragões de Garagem pela edição e pela legenda do material que vem a seguir. Um abraço, obrigado.
Yeah, I think there's two reasons why there's a growing interest to have scientists in Congress, across the country. First of all, most of the major issues that face us today are explicitly scientific questions, climate change, food security, food safety, public health issues, economics, basically, Congress is asked, or legislatures are asked to make decisions that are inseparably scientific all the time. And yet we have, very, very few people in Congress who are trained in any way in science. And that's not to say we should fill Congress entirely with scientists, but the balance right now is pretty off. We have a lot of lawyers, some people with background in business, but essentially nobody with background in science. I think we have 2 PhDs and scientists in Congress right now, and none in the Senate, and state legislatures. It's the same level. It's just a very underrepresented group of people relative to their importance in the issues that legislatures have to decide on. So that's the first issue. And the second is that, I think overall, in the US especially, but I think everywhere too, the process of making policy decisions has become too stridently political, and people make decisions in incredibly unempirical ways. And I think that, if we're gonna sort of pull ourselves out of the political rut we're in and the problems we're in, what we need are people who are used to just solving problems in an empirical way, collecting data, trying to understand what the problem is, and not coming at problems with an ideological solution in mind already, and try to actually figure out what's going to work. And I recognize that that's kind of a naively optimistic and point of view, but I think the more you have people who are pushing for, I wouldn't say apolitical, but pushing for practical empirical solutions to problems, it would be better for us. And I think scientists are good examples of that, but I also think farmers are good examples of that. And there's a lot of people in the world who are basically empirical problem solvers who would not be successful in their careers if they had made up their minds about what the answer was before they collected data. A farmer isn't going to be particularly good at their job if they decide 10 years in advance what to plant, without thinking about the market or the weather or the climate or the soil conditions. And it's just, if people who made political decisions based on the same kind of empirical things that guide their professional lives, I think we'd all be a lot better off. And so I think there are a lot of challenges to having more scientists in public life. It's hard to balance an actual job as a scientist with trying to get involved in politics. And there's also, I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but in the US there's been historically a lot of pressure on scientists to stay out of politics, to say that the way the world should work is scientists study the world and collect data and make judgments, and then politicians decide what to do about it. But since many politicians have failed on the first part, they've failed on the part of letting the scientists figure out what the problems are, and then the politicians just ignore them. I think it's important to try to close the loop a little bit and have people who understand the process of studying the world and have them in Congress. So I think there's been an awakening among scientists in the United States that there's that that classical divide, but where we said, well, scientists will collect data and politicians will act on it, that agreement has been broken by the politicians. And so I think scientists who are concerned about the way that science is being used or not used, mostly in politics, have realized that if they could get involved directly, that this would have a strong positive impact. So so I think that's the big reason, and then there's obvious immediate reasons. We have a Congress that just seems not to care about what are the obvious, most pressing issues, climate change and in particular, and I think we just have to change that dynamic and switch to a mode where Congress actually accepts what's going on and actually tries to figure out what the best solutions are, rather than sort of debating reality. So that was kind of what motivated me to want to get involved in politics. It's a tricky thing to do. I think to be honest, my initial goal was just to break the ice a little bit. Was to say, scientists are afraid of doing this, so let's just do it. Let's just leap first and try to get more people involved. And I think whether, I don't claim to have accomplished that myself, but I think that it's worked. There's a ton of people with scientific background, practicing scientists, who are running for office in lots of different places around the country. So I felt particularly annoyed at the poor way that scientific issues were getting brought up when Trump's cabinet appointees were being confirmed by the Senate. So I thought it would be helpful to have an actual scientist in the room to be asking them questions, instead of sort of third hand, trying to ask the questions that they think scientists might ask, and they're not usually good at that. So, I thought there might be an opportunity in the particular way we elect senators in California, because we don't have party primaries in California. We have just a big, I don't know how it's done in Brazil, but the top two candidates go, in a primary, go on to the final election. I think that's how you do your presidential elections, right? And that in the right circumstances, that creates an opportunity for somebody from the outside to sort of run and finish in second in a primary and maybe have a chance to go on. But the dynamics of this particular Senate race didn't work out that way, and our senator is both running for re-election and has a very well-financed, serious contender. So my particular involvement in this is not going to really go very far. But I do think we've reached the point with a really great outpouring of scientists across the country are running for office, including people who are actually running labs, to people who are trained as scientists and are doing other things, to to young people who just graduated from with degrees in scientific fields, who are running for office. And I'm pretty optimistic that in the next sort of generation of scientists, next generation of politicians, we're going to have at least a stronger representation of scientists than we currently do. And maybe someday we'll have a scientist as president, but that's probably a long way off. So.